Alrighty, welcome to Nikos RPG, and boy, I'm running late tonight. I apologize for that. Tonight we're going to be talking about a pretty important subject, though. We're going to be talking about how do you define fun, and more importantly, how do we redefine it in the new environment that we find ourselves in. I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master, and I've been a storyteller for 50 years, and that's continuous, ongoing play. So I think I know a little bit about which I speak. We are talking about fundamentally a regime, a new world order, if you will, a facility of life wherein creativity is dying. And I'm going to make my case for that and to explain why it is we need to perhaps recover the capacity for creativity in order to reestablish a more wholesome, more inclusive form of what is fun and enjoyment. Enjoy. Just joy. All right. So, if you have ever been here before and you like what you're seeing, make sure you click the buttons down below, like, follow, subscribe, all of those things, because those help us to let the algorithm know that you are our audience, that we are of the same cut from the same cloth, if you were. My objective, of course, is to make your games great and to improve the thrill and excitement you get from gameplay, and in particular role play games. But we're going to be talking really about the general concept tonight of what it is that is fun, what is enjoyable, and how it has changed. Of course, this is with 50 years of perspective, so of course you can. I'd love to have a conversation with you in the chat about your experience with what is fun, what is enjoyment, and so on. So first of all, we're going to talk about the concept of imitation versus innovation, and to give a framework for that, I'm going to give my own childhood as an example. When I was a kid, as they would say without any teeth, back in my day, we would do things a lot different. But the idea here is that we are in an age where imitation is overcoming innovation. And part of that, I believe, is a result of the very communications processes that we're using today. When, as I said, when I was young, when it was time to go and play, it was going outside, finding your bicycle, riding over to your friend's house or whatever, and then engaging in playful experiences. And they were very general. They were kind of the concept of playing, granted you can play sports, and even then you're playing the game itself, and perhaps you're, in your mind you're thinking that you're Mickey Mantle or you're Babe Ruth or whatever, but the concept of play was still you physically doing the activity. In the more general terms, it was you were playing grown up, or you were playing cops and robbers, or you were playing dare I say cowboys and Indians. You're playing, all of these things are more general. Even in the case when you were playing war, you were playing as a general soldier in the army. You weren't actually playing a live person. That was unconscionable because you were the one doing the playing. Now, granted, in those general role play environments, there was no need to play anything other than whatever, the lieutenant or whatever. But the idea is that the play mechanism was creative, innovative, on you as a player to derive what position you were playing, so to speak, and to furthermore think through what the actions were, what the visualizations were. You might see a building as a bunker, and there's all these different things where your brain will play games as long as you're engaging with it. But today's world isn't like that at all. As a matter of fact, everything is imitation. In other words, even if you are going to go outside, it's going outside to play a specific character you've seen in a television program you like, a hero from one of the motion pictures, perhaps a comic book, but more than likely it's going to be something that's on a screen somewhere, and it's going to be imitative rather than innovative. And my challenge is that I'm seeing an increasing number of companies that are moving into the role play category, even with branded properties. There's a G.I. Joe role play game. There's a My Little Ponies role playing game. And my challenge is that I'm perfectly fine with any genre you want to come up with. You can build it out. You can make a sci-fi story or whatever. But why do we have to imitate? I mean, even if you're going to play Rebels versus Empire along the lines of Star Wars, you don't have to go to the specifics of playing any given specific soldier. Even when you're looking at the Clone Wars, again, you're talking about the generalization of the creatures that you're fighting or whatever, rather than direct imitation. And that's just simply not the way people play anymore. It's becoming, matter of fact, I have found that when I run a role play roulette scenario and I say, okay, you can play an archetype from a genre, like for example, let's say we're playing Dayspring Solution, and so you're playing a member of a community, people automatically go to not only a television program they like to grab something, but they actually go to the character, and therefore they are now they're no longer emulating, they're now imitating. They're playing what they saw in their memories and perceiving it in a less imaginative and more imitative way. And this is, I believe, a major sign of the problems we are having in our community, in our culture, because we're no longer innovating and thinking beyond the sphere, or as my friend, or as other people might say, outside the box. They're limited in their expansion of their creativity because they're only limited now with what someone else's perception of the world would be, and they are living within that. And I think this is really greatly adversely affecting the idea of having fun. We're no longer having to engage and communicate about what it is we're perceiving. Instead, we're actually taking for granted that other people are seeing the same universe we are, because we are both drawing upon something that's already been created. Now, I'll come back to why I think this is a little bit later, but and it's really kind of one of the secrets of a good role play game. And this imitation is actually driving over the top of storytellers, in that more and more of the manufactured product that is coming out mandates that you're playing within the framework which they have already set up, rather than allowing you the opportunity to create your own and build off of what you have in your own mind. And I think in a lot of ways this is tied directly to the concept of intellectual property. Previous RPG products, and even the big ones that are available today, originally started with the idea that you're creating your world, utilizing their framework to build out the things that you're seeing in your imagination, and providing a descriptive platform for doing that collective creativity. And more to these days, it's clear and it's apparent and quite tangible that the manufacturers of role-play games, and in general all, even board games, are trying to format and transduce your creative energies into what they have already built, in order to maintain sovereignty over it in terms of intellectual property. The fact that Dungeons and Dragons has revised their creative licensing project process and requiring, the branding and the copywriting of creatures that they hold, that they have actually created. They are now setting that up so that you really don't have the opportunity to utilize the monsters that they have created, granted, because they created them, and therefore are holding you to a tighter concept of what the intellectual property of that game product is. This is, if you're looking, as I said, to the ones that are being produced under branded material, whether it be Marvel or whether you're looking at it from the standpoint of even Starship Troopers or whatever, they're tying you to their intellectual property and therefore downplaying the collective creativity that we as game masters have. I think it's partially because in the past, especially under the D20 license, there were a lot of people who produced properties using the Dungeons and Dragons format, but then appropriating other people's intellectual properties into what they were producing and putting themselves into legal dangers and such, because our culture is becoming increasingly litigious and more productive over this concept of intellectual property. I believe it's an extension, furthermore, of the idea of privacy, and the few products that have come out that afford opportunities for collective creativity are being downplayed and underscored and underplayed because they require more work. And as I said, we'll come to more details on that a little bit later. But the idea here is that the concept of a combined visualization of the world that is collective in nature is almost antithetical to intellectual property, unless the entire collective is also buying into that, and that therefore creates, unfortunately, a conformity and a unanimity of play that really undermines the idea of anything new. Because I've seen it in my own games when you have a player who has extensive knowledge of the setting and the iterational awareness of what's going on in the game, they begin to draw lines and say, no, it can't be that way because it wasn't that way for me before. And it's trying to build an anchor that unfortunately also calcifies the mind into reducing the possibilities. And that always is antithetical to the expansion and the creativity and the fun of utilizing our imagination. We'll again cover the specifics of this as we get a little bit later in the video. Again, I believe that one of the biggest antitheses of role-playing is actually the improvement of the output, if you will, of the electronic formatted games, because that provides for a greater depth of vicarious consumption. In other words, it's one thing to say, I've read Lord of the Rings, and therefore I have a perception of what has happened in that story. I have a mental picture of what a Balrog looks like. Perhaps I will have a different concept of orc than I had before or whatever. But once you see it on a screen, even the great Peter Jackson's version still calcifies the creative and imaginative nature of viewers. So therefore, when they then play a role-play game, they are seeing in their mind's eye not something that their mental processes have created from a description, but instead what they have seen somebody else create, and therefore are subject to the vicarious consumption of that property. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why I prefer theater of the mind play over the other styles of play, simply because if I put a model on the table of a specific creature, then the players get in their minds that that is what that monster type looks like in every story and at all times, and therefore you lose the ability for the players to create for themselves the visual experience. I can tell you that in sessions of mine, I've played through it, everybody is perfectly coherent on what they saw in the game, and then one or two of them perhaps start drawing pictures or making notes about it or whatever, and each person's perception, while in the moment of play were universal in understanding, rapidly become less so because somebody has gotten into their head a mental picture or something they saw in a motion picture that now has colored their perspective of what happened in that session. And I think in the short term, that visualization might be helpful because it lets the player play through the scene without asking additionally probing questions that may or may not drive down the immersiveness of the moment. But in the longer term, it then undermines the overall concept of creating and building in a world that is defined by the actual game session that you're playing in, and therefore you have to kind of figure out where you want to go in order to either roll back that image or at least give them an additional set of experiences that might redefine them. I believe that this really is an element of what we as a culture have become in terms of our idea of recreation versus entertainment. I'm going to kind of give a juxtaposition of the two words and kind of break them down, if you will. So I'm going to start actually with the entertainment. The term entertainment actually comes from several different root words back in, I believe it's Greek, and the idea is that you have the enter portion is to bring within, and the tain is as in contain. It's the idea is you literally bring people in and hold them down, hold them in position. And therefore, the idea of the Roman theater, the Roman Colosseum, was literally bring the people into the arena, give them bread, give them circuses, give them something to look at, so that they won't be innovative, creative, or question why there's not as much food coming into the city now as there was 2 weeks ago. Ironically, it's kind of similar to our current economic situation with a kind of a broken or ruined economy. We have to worry about those prices. But if instead we can watch flashy, sharp crystal images on a screen, then we will not be participating in those things. Conversely, recreation literally comes from the word create and to do it again. So it's to take the portion of our life that we have made and to play over it in our minds and to look at what the other possibilities could be. And therefore, recreation is a more of a diversive. It draws you away from the center, so to speak, whereas entertainment is to draw you within. And we have gotten to the point where our culture is most definitely focused greater on entertainment than we are on recreation. Of course, that's cultural and localized, so therefore people, for example, that live in the Midwest might have a greater draw from recreation than they do from the motion picture and entertainment industry, and that's why the inner cities and the cities in general tend to have a larger problem with this imitative rather than imaginative world. There's not as much actual recreation possibility. Instead, there's more entertainment options. Finally, we're going to come to, before I get into the actual resolution of this, I'm going to go talk about it, I think two more of these. But this is the concept of the difference between satisfaction and satiation. And I think one of the reasons why there are fewer role players per capita now than there was even a decade ago has everything to do with people moving in their lives to whether they are satisfied with the condition or whether they're completely overwhelmed and satiated with it. And when you are operating in a world that is imitative, there are literally only so many things that you can do within that scene, within that framework, without repeating or creating kind of a feeling of threshold of I've done all I can. The concept of satisfaction really comes from the other element that we'll be talking about in a minute, which is the way to solve this. And it has everything to do with the amount of effort that one puts into the thing that is providing your fun. All right, so now we're going to talk about the solution and resolution and whatever. Now, you may have heard of a couple of these. You may not have heard of all of them, but so I'm going to go over each of them in a one-to-one. Am I looking? No, I'm looking at the wrong camera. Got to get used to these dang things. The light changed, but I wasn't sure which way we were going. All right, so the relative difference between sandboxes, railroads, and theaters is actually a breakdown in the very concepts of how role play works. In the case of a sandbox, there is literally a defined framework for the players to make their decisions and literally play in that sandbox. And the idea of having a sandbox environment is to provide the players with a place for their creativity to really shine, because they get to change and focus the direction of the group's action so that there is growth, entertainment, excitement, thrills, and so whatever. But it's always on the players to have made that difference. Railroads, on the other hand, are created by the game master. Generally, he has to do a lot of prep work, setting up of all of the different situations. And if he's doing a particularly good job of the railroads, the players who are involved don't necessarily see it as taking away their agency, but nonetheless, it is following the course that was set by the storyteller. The third form, and while sometimes I get compared with this, but the concept of theater is that the players engage with the storyteller and all the different elements thereof in order to create a processed story within their time frame and their actions within the game, so that they are being literally at a theater and playing the scenes as if they were on stage and making it part of who they are. And the reason why I mention all three of these is there is a graduated amount of effort required by the participant that changes over time. So if you have come to a role-play game scenario and the storyteller has done a great job of setting up the scene and giving description and the narrative and the visualization, you're receiving it for those moments, the theater, and therefore you are gathering what's going on. This is ironically the least amount of work that the least average work in the group. In the case of the sandbox, it's all on the players, baby. If they aren't chasing a course and they're not deciding where they're going, then they're not able to progress. And I have seen a lot of sandbox games that start up strong, and the player has 2 or 3 ideas of what they want to do. They accomplish those, and suddenly they've run dry because they don't have the imaginative chops to continue, because their worldview has been marred and stunted by the amount of imitation and, I guess you'd say, processing they've done with other people's intellectual properties, so that the world that they are playing in is already defined and clarified and qualified, and so therefore the work they have to do to keep the story going is the greatest. Next to that, of course, the railroad is the opposite. The storyteller has to have done an extreme amount of work, done an extreme amount of development and concept creation and such. And then finally, in the theater, it's far less work on the player and far easier for the for the players, but not, and the game master's interaction with them makes for a more fun environment, but everybody's having to do more work because they are literally on stage, they are part of the scene, they are inclusive of the story. And so it's a matter, what I'm coming down to is it's the matter of the amount of work that the individual does that makes the difference. Okay, so now we come down to what is fun. Now, I've done an entire video on one angle of this, but we're going to look at what it is. I get one of these cameras right. 50%. I did 2 of them right, 2 of them wrong. But anyway, the element that is fun in a game session, by definition, has to be that which is fun for everyone at the table. And I think this is what has suffered the greatest because of the nature of our advancement culturally since my childhood till now. And what I mean by that is the term that we used a couple weeks ago in one of the videos, Schadenfreude, which is also the Milanese word Bambanam, which I like a lot better, defines the same thing, is the thrill and excitement of someone else's, failure, or bad fortune. So the idea is that if you're deriving your fun from somebody else's failure, that's fundamentally Schadenfreude, Bambanam. Many cases, for example, in the world of sports, this is critical. You're hoping for the other team to fumble, to overthrow a base, to miss the 3-pointer. And this derivation of our excitement from somebody else's failure really is a danger, because we should, in theory at least, enjoy the fun and creativity that happens when we're playing without emphasizing the bad that might happen to another. It's going to happen and it will cause pleasure. That's just the way we're designed. But we have to look at how our activity in the game is contributory to the fun of the group. And as I was just talking about when we were talking about kids back in the olden days, when you went outside to play with your friends, you were playing a game wherein each person got to put in submitted what they were doing in the action, and each person was appreciating and acting on that. Now, yes, were there conflicts? Of course. There were going to be problems when players interact, because we are human beings and we tend to function in the conflict of things. But when we are talking about what is generally fun, we want to make sure those things are a great collective. And maybe I might be one of the last people on the planet to feel this way. And if that's the case, feel free to let me know. And on the other hand, if you're like me, why don't you put a comment in and help support me with this idea? But the idea is that our enjoyment and our thrill should be about the progress that we're making in, if we're talking about a role play game in particular, the progress we're making towards the conclusion of the objectives we're trying to get to. Maybe some of the story is in the actual determining of what those good points, bad points are, but generally our play should be focused on getting to that. Another form of fun, of course, is reaching objectives. And so the inclusion of our persona's will in the game is really how we exert what it is we want to accomplish individually in the game. And so it's important to draw our fun from achieving those goals and letting others know what it is we're trying to accomplish, so that others can help you accomplish it. Because that's the element, I think, of play that we sometimes also forget, is that the very concept of camaraderie and community really comes from the collective interaction of succeeding or accepting our pathway and its direction in the story and what that really means. Another element of fun in games that, and it's fun in life, is winning. We all like to win. And so when you are playing, of course, a long-term, long-tail game, there may not be as many direct individual, W's, so to speak. You will have wins when the adventuring group accomplishes whatever the individual goal was that they were pursuing. And so it's a matter of really analyzing what it is you're involved with in the game, and playing at the same level of intensity as the others at the table. There's also, I think, an element of fun when we watch others achieve their goals. I know that it's really kind of fun when you're watching a sporting event where you have players, say, from your family that are part of the event, and you watch them cross the finish line first or whatever. You can cheer them on. And that is definitely a support role portion of RPGs. When somebody else is on the center stage and interacting with whatever NPC or situational condition or whatever, it's really important for the other players in the group to be as committed to that person's success as they are to their own. And I think all of these elements really come down to the amount of work. And I think that's what's really funny, is that our culture has focused on work to the point where you define yourself by what it is you do occupationally. But you very rarely interact with people about what it is you do for your personal entertainment, which is, I would say, to a greater extent than lesser, a disappointment or a unfortunate situation, because it's isolationist. It keeps us in our own little box. And if you are looking for a games experience where that is not the case, I encourage you to give role-playing a try, regardless of the genre or the theme or even the mechanics of which game you're playing. The role play experience will give you a richer, more broad understanding of what it is to have fun, and a deeper and arguably more long term byproduct of that will be your imagination and your memories of what happened in the session. I can't tell you how many game sessions that I've run that get sidelined because a player remembers something that happened 6 weeks ago in a campaign on the other side of the city, and they want to regale everyone with the details of it because for them it was a great memory. And so we have to kind of share with each other these stories and elements, and by finding more opportunities to play in these game sessions, we improve our own understanding and appreciation of the fun that they can build. Okay, so here's my parting shots. Role playing is, of course, my primary objective because that's what I've done for 50 years. But I've also played all kinds of other games as well, so don't think that this is necessarily only isolated to role play. It's just clearly the one to me that brings out the greatest forms of entertainment. In the case of holding the line, what I'm referring to is try, instead of always jumping to the story of somebody you saw in a movie once to determine the character you're going to play, or even in a board game, what kind of a strategy you might play. Consider what kinds of innovations and creativity you might try to see how that affects the outcome of the game, and hold your line on being able to create your own images. Don't fall into the trap of feeling you must play a persona from a genre because somebody else saw it in a movie once. You should be trying to figure out ways to make the gameplay experience in particular more useful to you, because it's going to give you the fuel for your imagination to drive more fun into the session. Find ways, again, holding the line is doing a bit of the work of looking at your character and determining what actually are motivating factors. How can the story be made different because your character is involved in the story, and to find ways to bring forth that story in a way that will surprise and delight your other players in the group. Because even if you're not the storyteller, even if you're a mere player, and even if you're just consider yourself to be a support player, the actions and the ideas that you portray and present in role play will amplify the enjoyment of others. We talked a bit yesterday about role playing, that is using the dice to replace your actual skills. There's nothing wrong with utilizing them, but why not give your creativity a bit of a shot in the arm by considering how you would role play that if you did have those skills. And perhaps that will open your imaginative floodgates a little bit and give you more opportunities. The elements of play, whether they at a board game, miniatures game, role-playing game, your imaginative input will amplify the fun experience of everybody at the table. Well, I've gotten to the end, and I've been playing with my polyhedral long enough. I want to thank you for being here. I hope to see you again the next time. We record Mondays through Thursdays, 10 a.m. and generally 11 p.m. I was a little bit late tonight. I apologize for that. But I do want to also remind you can always check out more of our videos at Nikos RPG on YouTube. So that's at Nikos RPG on YouTube. And also, if you want to learn how to become a member of our community, become a player in our games that are online, check out our Patreon account at patreon.com/Nikos, N-Y-C-O-S, like the logo down below. And I will see you in the next video. Have a great week and great games at your table.